Good evening, friends. Settle in now. Dim your lights if you haven't already, and let the day drift quietly to the edges of your mind. The world outside can wait a while. Find your favorite blanket, perhaps a cup of something warm, and let's take a slow walk through time, through mist, and along the sleepy banks of a Scottish loch that has been keeping secrets, or at least pretending to, for nearly a century. If this calm little journey helps you unwind, you can tap like or subscribe. Only if it feels right, of course. Nothing rushed, nothing loud. Now, take a breath, in and out. Imagine we're standing together at the edge of Loch Ness. The air is cool, the kind of crisp that feels freshly laundered. A soft drizzle freckles the surface of the water, tiny circles spreading like the slow pulse of a resting heart. The loch stretches so far that it seems to hold the night itself, a mirror for the sky's grey-blue hush. You might hear a faint hum of midges, a distant sheep complaining somewhere up the hill, and, if you listen closely, the deep, unhurried sigh of the water itself. Loch Ness is long and narrow, folded between hills like a bookmark slipped between the pages of Scotland. It's not a dramatic place by day, and at night it feels positively drowsy, as though it's been reading its own legend for so long that it too is nodding off halfway through the story. The locals will tell you they've always felt the loch was different, not frightening, just peculiar, too deep, too dark, too self-contained. The Gaelic name Loch Ness likely comes from an old river goddess, though she hasn't sent out a press release in centuries. Even before the famous monster tales, travellers wrote of strange ripples or shadows. But then, travellers in the Highlands have always been generous with adjectives and whiskey. Picture the early 1900s. Motorcars are a novelty. Radios are crackling into drawing rooms, and Scotland's north remains a place where the pace of life is dictated by weather, livestock, and how long the kettle takes to boil. The loch sleeps beneath its shroud of fog, unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, that it is about to become a celebrity. Let me take you back even further, just for a moment. The first whisper of something mysterious here dates to the 6th century, when St. Columba supposedly encountered a water beast in the River Ness. The saint, being a busy man with miracles to perform, simply raised his hand and commanded the creature to stop. It did, and everyone apparently went home satisfied. The tale was recorded centuries later by a monk who, like most good storytellers, may have embellished the lighting for dramatic effect. Fast forward more than 1,000 years, and Loch Ness remains unremarkable except to the locals, fishermen, and a few romantics who think misty hills make excellent poetry fuel. Trains occasionally rumble past, scattering sheep and echoing across the water like a yawn. The world changes, telephones ring, jazz hums across the Atlantic, but the loch stays mostly the same. Its monsters, if any, are patient sleepers. Then comes the decade that will give the quiet lake its loudest story, the 1930s. But before we dive into that bustling era, let's linger a little longer on the shore, where time feels as slow as honey sliding from a spoon. Imagine the smell: peat smoke curling from chimneys, damp grass, and the faint sweetness of heather. The water's surface holds an occasional shimmer of reflected moonlight, but mostly it's dark, an inky calm that could swallow the flicker of a lantern whole. I sometimes think the loch enjoys its role as a stage. Even when nothing is happening, it looks as though something might. And perhaps that's why people began to see things, or thought they did. Human eyes are dreamers. They stitch stories into shadows. You stare long enough at a patch of moving water, and your mind begins to doodle. A wave becomes a hump. A floating log acquires ambition. You blink, and suddenly you've witnessed a legend. Of course, that's the gentle version. The less charitable explanation is that the Highlands are damp, and prolonged exposure to drizzle can inspire imaginative thinking. But I prefer to believe the loch likes a bit of mischief. There's a particular evening I want you to picture, an invented one, but built from the true spirit of those early reports. The year is somewhere around 1930. A local shopkeeper, heading home after closing up, pauses by the water's edge. The sky is a blanket of cloud, the kind that steals all colour from the world until only greys remain. He hears a soft splash, then another. The surface ripples outward. He squints. Is that movement? Something large, perhaps? Or just the wake of a boat long gone? He leans forward, breath held, and the silence stretches until it feels like the loch itself is listening back. Then, a gust of wind, the ripple breaks apart, and the mystery vanishes. The shopkeeper shakes his head, smiles at his own fancy, and trudges home for supper. But later, over a plate of stew, he mentions it to his wife, and she to her cousin, and before long, the entire village knows someone might have seen something. That's how legends often start. Not with thunder, but with a shrug. It would be another few years before newspapers truly sink their teeth into the tale. But even in these quiet, pre-headline days, the ground is being prepared. The way the loch's mud floor waits patiently beneath the still water, holding centuries of silt and secrets. Now, let's sit with that image for a moment. The water is perfectly still again. The drizzle has softened to mist. The hills crouch like old guardians, their slopes velvety with moss. You might hear an owl or the faint clink of someone's pail a mile away. Time has flattened itself out, and the night feels endless but kind. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the air brushing your cheeks, damp and cold, but somehow comforting. The kind of chill that makes a fire later feel twice as warm. There's a house not far from here, where a family is gathered around a hearth. The radio hums faintly. News from London, perhaps, or dance music from the continent, soft and crackly. Someone is knitting. Someone else stirs a pot. The conversation drifts lazily to gossip about that deep, dark water outside and whether it truly hides anything worth talking about. And maybe that's what draws us in. The possibility that something extraordinary could live within the ordinary if we just stare long enough. Every village, every person, needs a little wonder tucked under the mundane. Loch Ness simply provides a convenient backdrop for it. When I first read the old accounts, pages browned by time, ink fading like polite whispers, I noticed how careful the language was. People didn't claim they'd seen a monster, not at first. They saw something unusual, or a disturbance, or a great form. The words tiptoed around certainty, the way we might edge toward a sleeping cat on a windowsill, hoping not to startle it. And in those phrases, so hesitant yet hopeful, lies the charm of the whole affair. It's not about proof, it's about maybe. Maybe there's something. Maybe there isn't. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe it's magic. Maybe, just maybe, it's both. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think of that still loch and imagine all the maybes floating just beneath its surface like quiet dreams. Each ripple is a thought, spreading outward, gentle and unhurried. In the early years before fame found it, Loch Ness was simply part of daily life for people here. Fishermen rowed out before dawn, their oars creaking softly. Children skimmed stones. There were no crowds, no cameras, just a rhythm of seasons, and the ever-present company of the water. The loch was not yet shy. It was simply itself, an old friend humming under its breath. Sometimes a deer would come down to drink, its reflection trembling beside it. Sometimes a boat would pass, leaving a curl of foam that dissolved like memory. The loch took everything in and gave nothing away. And perhaps that's what makes it such a soothing place to think about. In a world that talks so loudly, the loch listens. In a century that rushed forward on engines and headlines, this narrow stretch of water remained content to do almost nothing at all. But as the 1930s dawned, even a quiet loch couldn't ignore the curiosity of humankind. New roads meant easier access. Tourists began to appear, first a trickle, then more. They brought binoculars, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and a bright enthusiasm that the mist itself couldn't dampen. A hotel near the shore added postcards featuring the loch, though at that stage they were monster-free. A few adventurous photographers set up tripods, mostly capturing fog and the backs of their own heads. Someone joked that the loch was camera-shy, and the nickname stuck longer than expected. It was an age hungry for marvels. Between wars, people wanted something to believe in, something gentle and improbable. The world had enough hard truths. What it needed was a whisper of wonder. Loch Ness, vast and mysterious, yet utterly peaceful, was ready to supply it. Before we step fully into that moment, the spark that turned whispers into headlines, let's pause here, right at the edge of history's hush. The air is getting colder. The hills are blurring into darkness. Our breath fogs faintly in front of us, each exhale a ghost that forgets to haunt. In this silence, the loch seems to hold its breath too. You might feel it, an expectancy, soft as a heartbeat under blankets. Something is about to happen, but not yet. For now, it is simply water and wind and the comfortable weight of night. So we linger, letting the ripples settle, listening to that quiet Scottish lullaby of distant water meeting shore. Perhaps somewhere, deep beneath the black surface, a fish turns over in its sleep, or something larger, something slower, stirs and drifts back into the shadows. Not to frighten, just to stretch. And maybe, if you lean close enough, you'll hear it murmur in the language of bubbles and waves. Not yet. Let them wander a little longer. That is where we'll leave the first chapter, on the edge of discovery, where nothing has happened but everything feels possible. The loch returns to stillness, and so should you. Take another breath in and out. The night deepens, the mist curls tighter, and the water resumes its ancient rhythm. In the next chapter, we'll wander into the 1930s proper, where the calm will meet curiosity, and where one photograph, one very blurry, polite photograph, will begin the world's long fascination with our shy lake creature. For now, rest in the sound of gentle ripples. The morning after our quiet vigil beside Loch Ness begins the way so many Scottish mornings do, softly. The mist is unhurried, wandering from hill to hill, as though deciding where to spend the day. The air smells faintly of peat and wet grass. Somewhere down in the village, a kettle sighs, and the world prepares for tea before it prepares for anything else. It's the early 1930s now. The decade has barely cleared its throat. Newspapers are brimming with headlines about aviation records and cinema openings. But up here by the loch, time continues to move at its own drowsy pace. The sheep don't care who's flying where. The shopkeepers open when they please. The only thing faster than the clouds is gossip. Let me paint it gently. A single narrow road tracing the loch's edge, patched with puddles and occasional optimism. a few motor cars groaning up the incline, their horns polite, as though apologizing for existing. On one of those mornings, the first sighting to truly stir the 20th century's imagination would drift quietly into conversation, like steam curling from a teacup. It happened in April 1933, though the month itself was unaware of its importance. A couple named Aldi Mackay and her husband John were driving along the new road when Mrs. Mackay suddenly pointed toward the water. "Look," she might have said, in the soft authority of someone who knows when something is worth looking at. Out on the loch, a shape, a dark rolling something, moved against the still surface. It rose, fell, and disappeared. Now, imagine this not as a dramatic film scene, but as the quiet surprise of an ordinary drive. The car hums, the wind nudges at the windows, and two people blink at the water, trying to decide whether to trust their eyes. They don't stop the car, at least not for long. They simply continue, heart slightly quicker, conversation quieter, the way one does after seeing something that doesn't fit in the usual boxes of reason. Later that evening, Mrs. Mackay recounts her vision to the manager of the Drumnadrochit Hotel, a kindly man named Alex Campbell, who also happens to write part-time for the Inverness Courier. Campbell listens, nods, and perhaps pours another cup of tea. The loch, after all, has always had its moods, but there's something in Mrs. Mackay's tone, a tremor between excitement and disbelief that makes him take the story down. When the article appears, the words are careful. A strange creature, perhaps a whale-like fish, seen in Loch Ness. There's no mention of monsters, no exclamation marks, just curiosity, wrapped in the calm formality of 1930s journalism. And yet, like a single pebble tossed into still water, the ripples begin. People begin to watch the loch more closely. A baker claims he saw something too, just yesterday. A fisherman reports unusual waves. By the week's end, it seems nearly everyone has glimpsed, or nearly glimpsed, something remarkable. The village feels quietly thrilled, as though it has been given a secret worth sharing in whispers. Now, let's pause here. Imagine the sound of pages turning, a newspaper rustling near the fire, the warmth of tea between your hands, the scent of rain drying from your coat. Outside, the loch is unchanged, still vast, still silent, but in people's minds, it has begun to stir. By May, larger newspapers catch the scent of this gentle mystery. The Scottish Daily Mail prints an account, followed by the Daily Express. The term monster makes its first shy appearance, slipping into a headline like a guest uncertain if they're invited to the party. And what a party it will become. The 1930s are an age eager for wonder. Cinema is new magic. Radio fills parlors with voices from miles away, and the world is learning to be astonished. Against this backdrop, the Loch Ness story is perfect. Safe mystery, easily imagined, endlessly debatable. No danger, just intrigue. A bedtime story for grown-ups. Soon, the banks of the loch host a new kind of visitor. Not pilgrims or poets, but photographers and day trippers. They bring thermos flasks and sandwiches, their laughter fluttering over the water. Children press their noses to binoculars. Old men squint and declare they've seen similar things since before the Great War, though no one ever asked them before. Picture it now. A summer afternoon in 1933. The grass is slick from a recent drizzle, and a group of holidaymakers sits on the verge, their car parked half on, half off the narrow road. The boot is open. There's a picnic laid out. Jam, sandwiches, shortbread, a flask of something strong disguised as tea. One of them peers through a camera, eyes narrowed, scanning the loch's grey-green expanse. "Anything yet?" someone asks. "Only ripples," comes the reply. And yet those ripples are enough. Every faint disturbance, every shadow under the water, is now a candidate for fame. A boat's wake becomes evidence. A floating log becomes proof. Even the wind acquires personality. At the time, cameras are slow, cumbersome creatures. Boxes that wheeze before clicking. Lenses that fog at the first hint of rain. To catch a moving mystery on film seems nearly impossible. But impossibility rarely stops enthusiasm. People wait for hours, huddled under umbrellas, eyes watering, certain that patience will be rewarded. Some nights, they gather in the inn sharing what they've seen, or nearly seen. The conversations hum like bees in a hive. "I swear it had humps," says one. "Two humps," says another, "and moving faster than any otter." "A wake without a boat," adds a third gravely, as though announcing a rare comet. And then someone laughs, and someone else orders another round, and the legend thickens like good stew. Meanwhile, our polite loch keeps its secrets. Beneath that dark mirror, the temperature changes with depth. Currents twist in ways even scientists struggle to map. The loch is deep, so deep that entire cathedrals could hide within it, their steeples brushing unseen fish. If a creature wanted solitude, there could be no finer address. By autumn, curiosity has matured into full fascination. Tourists fill the inns. Postcards now feature playful drawings of long-necked beasts smiling beside tartan borders. The locals are bemused but accommodating. After all, a mystery that brings business is a friendly one. Children earn pocket money selling Nessie pebbles or authentic monster water, bottled from the shoreline. It is a very Scottish entrepreneurship, polite, practical, and faintly amused. And then, one photograph changes everything. It arrives in 1934, taken, so it is said, by a respected London surgeon, Dr. Robert Kenneth Wilson. The picture shows a graceful swan-like neck, rising from the rippled surface. It is black and white, grainy but elegant, the monster's silhouette poised like a creature who knows its best angles. The photograph appears in the Daily Mail and instantly captures imaginations worldwide. It is christened the surgeon's photograph, and for decades it will serve as the face of Nessie, the ambassador of the unexplained. Now, as you listen, don't imagine the photograph appearing with any fanfare. Picture instead a slow moment in a newspaper office. Typesetters leaning over metal plates, editors yawning, the hum of printing presses rolling like distant thunder. Sheets of newsprint slide out, folded, bundled, sent off on trains through the night. Somewhere, a reader at breakfast pauses, teacup halfway to lips, and peers at the tiny image. "Well," they murmur, "would you look at that?" Across cities and continents, similar murmurs spread, gentle as dawn. People want to believe. They clip the picture, show it to friends, and stare into the grainy waterline until their eyes ache. The Loch Ness Monster becomes a household name. The loch itself, once a quiet stretch of water, now lives in the dreams of millions. What's curious is how tender the fascination feels. Nessie, unlike other monsters, is never cruel. There are no attacks, no disappearances, only glimpses. She's shy, polite, and photogenic. The world, perhaps weary of harsh realities, embraces this courteous creature as a collective lullaby. I like to think of the loch smiling softly beneath its mist, bemused by all the attention. Tourists standing shoulder to shoulder with cameras, as though an ancient being might pop up for a portrait. The water laps at their boots and goes on being water, patient and unbothered. Some evenings, when the sun hangs low and the hills wear their shawls of shadow, the loch looks exactly as it did before fame arrived. The same sighing waves, the same drifting reeds, but now every ripple carries a little weight of hope. Somewhere in those dark folds might be the shy creature of headlines, gliding unseen, unaware of its own celebrity. Let's imagine ourselves there again. You and I sitting on a rock, sharing a flask of tea, watching the light soften over the water. Midges hover. The air smells of wet stone and grass. You can almost taste the quiet. Far off, a motorboat cuts across, leaving a wake that stretches and fades. You watch it disappear, then glance back, and for a heartbeat, you're sure you see something. A curve of darkness, a flicker of motion. Then it's gone. The loch, innocent as ever, smooths itself back into stillness. You chuckle. Perhaps, you say, that was her. And I might answer, perhaps it was nothing at all. The beauty is that it doesn't matter. The seeing, the wondering, that's the true magic. The loch gives us permission to imagine. As twilight deepens, the voices along the shore quieten. Car engines fade. Somewhere, a gramophone plays a waltz from London, its notes drifting out of an inn window. The smell of supper curls into the cool air. Broth, bread, something hearty. A dog barks half-heartedly. We linger a while longer, watching the surface darken until it mirrors the sky, a seamless blend of silver and night. This, then, is how it began. A pair of watchful eyes, a newspaper column, a ripple that became a legend. The 1930s had found their monster, a monster that harmed no one, frightened no one, and politely declined every interview. As we rise to leave, the mist thickens once more, blurring the hills into suggestion. The loch sighs. Behind us, the road gleams faintly under the moon, a ribbon leading back toward the village and its warm windows. And as you tuck yourself deeper under your blanket, imagine that road stretching out through time, carrying stories, laughter, skepticism, and endless cups of tea. The legend will grow, stumble, and grow again. But for now, in this soft slice of the 1930s, it's just beginning to shimmer into life. Let your thoughts drift like the ripples we leave behind. The night is long, the loch is calm, and everything mysterious feels friendly. If you were to stand on the road above Loch Ness in the summer of 1934, you'd notice that the stillness we began with has grown busier, but not hurried. The loch hasn't lost its calm, only acquired a new audience for it. Cars line the roadside like patient beetles. Couples in tweed coats lean against railings with flasks of tea. A boy sells shortbread from a tin, shouting as politely as one can shout in Scotland. And all of it, every camera tripod, every whisper exists because somewhere beneath that grey water, someone might, possibly, on a very good day, glimpse a ripple that isn't just a ripple. I sometimes think the 1930s were an odd mix of nerves and hope. The Great War was over, but not forgotten. Radios hummed comfort into kitchens. People wanted to believe in progress, but also in wonder. A polite monster in a cold loch fit perfectly between those needs. She required no fear, only imagination. In the nearby towns, especially Inverness, you could feel the story everywhere. Taxi drivers offered monster tours. Barbers debated whether the creature preferred herring or haddock, and at least one printer, sensing an opportunity, sold postcards bearing the phrase, "Greetings from Loch Ness, home of the gentle beast." Each card showed the same photograph, a serene landscape with absolutely nothing unusual happening. The customers loved them. On some evenings, I like to picture a small inn by the shore. There's a sign above the door that reads, "The Glenmore Arms," its paint flaking slightly from damp air. Inside, the floorboards creak with the sort of honesty that only old wood knows. The fire burns low, the smell of peat mingling with broth. Around a round table near the window sit a group of locals and visitors, a fisherman, a London journalist, a school teacher from Glasgow, and an American tourist who insists on calling the loch the lake. They're talking, of course, about the monster. The journalist, tie slightly askew, scribbles in a notebook. "If there is something," he says, "it would make a splendid feature. Perhaps the last undiscovered creature of the modern age." The fisherman chuckles, his accent thick as porridge. "Aye, maybe. Or maybe it's just old Angus's cow that wandered in for a swim." Laughter rolls around the room, warm and quiet. The American raises a glass. "Well," he says, "here's to Nessie. May she stay just blurry enough to keep you all employed." They toast, the glasses clinking softly. Outside, the loch listens, amused. Newsreel companies soon arrive with bulky cameras and cheerful announcers. One black and white clip from 1935 opens with a sweeping shot of mist over water, and the narration, brisk yet polite. Here we are at Loch Ness, ladies and gentlemen, where rumour has it a prehistoric creature roams these tranquil waters. Will it appear today? One can only hope, and keep one's camera ready. It is impossible not to smile at the enthusiasm. The camera pans to locals squinting heroically at the horizon, as though determination alone might summon a plesiosaur. Then the reel ends with the caption, "No monster yet." But Scotland remains beautiful. The public adored it, in cinemas from London to New York. Audiences leaned forward. Popcorn paused halfway to lips, imagining the cool Scottish air and that vast, secretive water. The idea that something unknown could hide in such a civilized century felt refreshing. A reminder that not everything had been mapped, labelled and catalogued. Of course, the scientists had opinions too. Professors from Edinburgh and Cambridge arrived with measuring lines and notebooks. They calculated depths, recorded temperatures, discussed ancient glaciers, and politely declared that a large creature was improbable, though not impossible. That phrase, improbable, though not impossible, became a sort of motto. It was the scientific equivalent of a wink. The public loved it. Headlines borrowed it. Tour guides recited it. The monster, shy as she was, had entered the language of optimism. By 1936, the loch had its own rhythm of fascination. Early mornings began with the cough of engines and the clatter of cameras being unpacked. Through the day came waves of chatter, claims, debates, sandwiches being unwrapped. Then evening descended, bringing quiet again, as the mist folded everything back into peace. It was as though the loch permitted curiosity only during daylight hours and reclaimed its solitude by night. There were, of course, experts of every flavour. One man claimed to communicate with the creature through vibrations made by banging on the side of his boat. Another believed Nessie was a surviving sea cow, tragically separated from her kind during the Ice Age. Yet another insisted it was all nonsense, but enjoyed the attention too much to stop talking. Even the skeptics grew fond of the monster they didn't believe in. That was the charm of the frenzy. It was gentle, good-humoured, more community theatre than confrontation. Nobody shouted. They just wondered, discussed, and ordered another cup of tea. Meanwhile, the world outside the Highlands ticked on. In cities, jazz played, telegrams clicked, and airplanes stitched the clouds. But the Loch Ness story kept blowing steadily, a counter-rhythm to modern life. When newspapers elsewhere shouted about politics or markets, the Loch Ness Monster Seen Again headline offered a small sigh of relief. And the more the legend spread, the softer it became. Illustrations of the creature evolved. Early sketches showed a hulking serpent, but soon artists gave her kinder eyes, smoother curves, a half smile even. She looked like she might apologize if she bumped your boat. At village fairs, children's games appeared. Pin the tail on Nessie and feed the monster. Local bakers shaped buns into long, coiled forms dusted with sugar. Nessie buns, they called them. They sold out every weekend. One particularly rainy afternoon, a radio broadcast tried something new. The host, with a voice like syrup, announced a live search from the loch. Microphones crackled, seagulls cried faintly in the distance, and listeners leaned closer to their sets. Nothing yet, the reporter said every few minutes, rain tapping on his umbrella. Still nothing. The loch remains, beautifully calm. For half an hour, the nation listened to the sound of absolutely nothing happening, and loved it. It was, in many ways, the perfect program for a weary world. Suspense without stress, adventure without consequence. I often imagine someone in London that night, lying in bed, the wireless glowing faintly on the bedside table. Outside, trams rattle by. Inside, the gentle hiss of static carries the voice from Scotland. The water is still. Perhaps we'll try again tomorrow. Then the click of the switch, the room going quiet, and that comforting thought, maybe somewhere, far away, a creature is gliding through dark water, completely at peace. That was the kind of frenzy the 1930s offered. Polite, endearing, and strangely restful. Of course, curiosity can never sit still for long. Within a few years, expeditions became grander. Wealthy enthusiasts arrived with sonar devices, then cutting-edge technology. They charted the loch's depths, producing maps that resembled the wrinkles of a sleeping giant. The readings showed unusual shapes, mysterious echoes, pockets of cold water that could hide anything, or nothing at all. Each discovery sparked another headline, another wave of tourists. Yet even with all that attention, the mood remained unhurried. The loch was never overrun, never loud. The soundscape was always the same. Wind, birds, soft laughter, and the rhythmic click of camera shutters trying to catch something they half hoped would never appear. There's a quiet wisdom in that. Perhaps people didn't truly want proof. Proof ends a story. Mystery lets it breathe. By the late 1930s, Nessie had become part of Scotland's identity. Children drew her in school. Souvenir shops sold miniature monsters carved from wood. One enterprising hotel owner even left a space blank on the guest register marked for the monster, should she visit. Someone scrawled a shaky X in it one night, and the page has been carefully preserved ever since. Then, as the decade neared its close, the world began to change again. War clouds gathered far beyond the hills. The newspapers that once printed playful columns about Nessie turned to grimmer headlines. Tourists left, soldiers trained nearby. The loch grew quiet once more, its surface unbroken except for wind and rain. But the legend, like the water itself, never froze. Through those dark years, letters still arrived at local papers from people claiming to have seen the creature, alive and well. It was as if the world needed her calm persistence, a reminder that somewhere beneath the turbulence, there was still a place where the biggest news was a ripple on the water. I sometimes think the loch understood the times better than we did. It carried on, steady and deep, mirroring both sky and sorrow, never hurried, never hopeless. And perhaps Nessie, real or not, was part of that endurance, a symbol of quiet mystery that refused to vanish even when the world trembled. Tonight, as we drift through that memory, imagine the loch in late twilight, the last orange light fading behind the hills, the water turning silver, then black, a faint wind teasing the reeds. From the village, one lamp flickers and goes out. For a long moment, everything is perfectly still. Then, maybe, a small splash, a ripple widening slowly, softly, until it disappears into the dark. You could spend a lifetime waiting to see what made it, or you could simply close your eyes, content in the knowing that something unknown is still allowed to exist. The frenzy of the 1930s has ended, but the calm remains. The cameras, the tea flasks, the laughter, all part of a dream that never quite faded. And as we leave this chapter, let the quiet of the loch follow you. The water hums a lullaby older than any newspaper, deeper than any rumor. In the next chapter, we'll drift with the scientists and skeptics who tried to measure that lullaby, who brought submarines, sonar, and skepticism to a lake that preferred poetry. For now, let the mist roll in. Breathe with the water's rhythm, and let the loch be your mirror, calm, deep, endlessly curious, and beautifully still. The loch is quiet again. The last of the 1930s excitement has faded into memory, and what remains is the steady rhythm of water touching stone. Mist slips low over the surface like folded linen. To the unhurried eye, nothing much has changed, but beneath that calm, curiosity still hums like the faint vibration of a distant boat engine. By now, the story of the shy lake creature has circled the world, and when a story travels that far, it eventually meets the people who feel an irresistible urge to measure it, not to spoil it exactly, just to weigh it, chart it, and write neat numbers in the margins. The scientists have arrived, each one armed with instruments that clink softly in their cases, like polite silverware at a dinner they're not quite sure how to eat. It begins quietly, as all things in this tale seem to. A letter to the Natural History Museum in London, a professor at Oxford sketching a plesiosaur between spoonfuls of soup. Plans whispered over tea. If something so large lives in Loch Ness, surely modern science can coax it into view. The tone is not boastful. It's more like a challenge from one gentleman to another. Let's have a look, shall we? By 1938, survey boats are on the water. The first sonar machines, great humming contraptions smelling faintly of oil and optimism, are lowered into the depths. The men peer at green screens, tracing dots of light that drift and fade. Every now and then someone murmurs, "There, that shadow there." A pause, a squint, a note scribbled down. Unidentified object, moving slowly east. Then nothing. Just the steady ping 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 echoing through the hull like a heartbeat trying to fall asleep. The loch, obliging as ever, offers up just enough oddities to keep them hopeful. Strange currents that bend light. Thermoclines where warm and cold water meet, dancing invisibly together. A sudden swirl that might be a fish or a log or a ripple remembering last week's wind. Each possibility is recorded in tidy handwriting, sealed in folders, and later filed beside other mysteries that never learned how to sit still for photographs. Imagine, for a moment, being there. The deck underfoot damp and slick. The scientists wrapped in thick wool coats, their breath misting like small ghosts. One adjusts his spectacles, another adjusts his expectations. The equipment hums, the water laps, and a gull floats past, eyeing them with professional skepticism. Now and then the boat engine stops. and for a heartbeat the world holds its breath. Nothing moves but the mist. It's in those silences, I think, that the loch feels most alive, not because anything happens, but because it could. As dusk folds in, the men pour tea from a dented flask. The cups rattle slightly in their hands. Still nothing definite, one says. Splendid, replies another. Imagine if we actually found it. What would we talk about next week? They laugh quietly, their voices carried away by the wind. Back on shore, other teams set up cameras and lights. One engineer from Glasgow insists on using underwater microphones. Another brings a trained seal named Morag, hoping the creature might find companionship. Morag, however, spends most of the expedition napping on the boat, proving herself a true Highlander at heart. For all their instruments and enthusiasm, the scientists discover what the locals already knew. The loch doesn't reveal itself on command. It's like asking a cat to fetch. You can call all you like. It will acknowledge you when it chooses. Yet even the failures are oddly comforting. Each expedition ends with thick reports, charts, and photographs of very ordinary things. A drifting branch, a school of salmon, a diver's air bubble mistaken for a monster's sigh. And still, every report concludes the same way. Further investigation recommended. The polite scientific version of maybe next time. Decades will pass, of course, but the 1930s lay the groundwork. Curiosity becomes tradition. Year after year, someone brings a new device, a brighter hope. Submarines shaped like tin teapots. Cameras so sensitive they capture the shimmer of dust in the water. Hydrophones tuned to the pitch of dreams. Each attempt feels both earnest and endearingly futile. I picture one small submarine, painted yellow, inevitably, lowered carefully into the loch in the late 1930s for a test. The operator, a young naval engineer with more courage than space, squeezes into the metal capsule, bolts the hatch, and disappears beneath the surface. The air inside smells of steel and damp wool. Through the tiny porthole he sees only darkness. The beam of his lamp fades after a few feet, swallowed whole. He listens. The machine hums. Then faintly, something brushes the hull. A shiver climbs his spine. He notes it down later as contact with drifting debris. But in that instant, he's certain he's been politely tapped on the shoulder by history. Up above, his colleagues pace the deck, mugs steaming in the cold air. They trade nervous jokes, watching the bubbles rise. When the little sub surfaces again, there's a collective sigh. Half relief, half disappointment. No monster photographs, but at least no missing engineer either. They haul the sub aboard, pat its dented side, and call it a day. In the evenings, the scientists mingle with locals at the inn. The conversations blur the line between data and folklore. "You're measuring shadows," an old fisherman tells them kindly. Best thing about a shadow is you can never catch it. The scientists smile, make another note, and secretly wish they could put that quote in their reports. Outside, the loch absorbs it all. The sonar pings, the laughter, the quiet splash of oars. It has seen monks, tourists, and now men with microphones. None have managed to disturb its nap. I sometimes think of those expeditions as lullabies disguised as research. The pings, the motors, the clatter of notes. They form a rhythm, steady and hypnotic. The scientists think they're studying the loch, but perhaps the loch is studying them. How long will humans chase mystery before realizing that the chase itself is the comfort? Years later, when people read the reports, they find poetry in the precision. Depth 754 feet. Visibility limited. Temperature 5 degrees Celsius. Each line feels like a verse of a minimalist poem titled Patience. And through it all, Nessie, real or imagined, remains beautifully cooperative by doing nothing at all. She doesn't surface dramatically or roar for the cameras. She simply continues her elegant invisibility, the patron saint of uncertainty. Toward the decade's end, the world grows noisier again. The sonar pings are replaced by the drums of war, and the scientists pack up their equipment, promising to return after things settle. They do, eventually years later, older and perhaps wiser, to find the loch exactly as they left it, waiting, still breathing mist. When they lower their instruments once more, the same echoes answer back. A few large shapes here, a cluster of fish there, nothing that insists on being named. And perhaps that's the lesson the loch offers all its visitors, that not everything needs a label before it can be loved. Picture it now as we leave these careful men and their quiet machines. The last light of dusk gilding the ripples, the scent of oil and rain, the murmured arithmetic of notes being tallied, then the clink of teacups, a yawn, and the final decision of the day, no monster sighted, but plenty learned. The boat drifts back toward shore, lantern swaying. Behind them, the loch smooths itself once more, erasing the day's disturbances like a page turning gently over. And somewhere, deep beneath that glassy calm, perhaps a slow shape moves just out of sight. Perfectly ordinary, perfectly mysterious, casting a shadow that refuses to stay still, then vanishing again into the cradle of quiet water. As the crew packs away their instruments, a single raindrop lands on the captain's notebook, blurring the words "further investigation recommended." He smiles faintly. "Maybe tomorrow," he says. And above the water, the mist curls like breath, patient as always. The war years pass like a long exhale. When the world finally remembers how to breathe again, the loch is waiting, unmoved, unscarred, and still pretending to be shy. The hills look the same, the water just as dark. Yet the people who return to its banks are changed. They have seen too much noise and too little wonder. And so, in the quiet after war, they reach once more for gentler mysteries. Trains begin to bring holiday makers north again. Families step out in coats too heavy for summer, blinking at the clean light. They come with sandwiches, binoculars, and the faint hope of seeing something that has refused to be seen since before the sirens. What they find instead is peace, the sort of peace that hums softly, like an old kettle beginning to boil. The village wakes slowly to the rhythm of peacetime. The baker opens his shutters. The smell of bread and sweet rolls drifts down the lane. In the little gift shop near the pier, a sign appears. Nessie souvenirs, locally imagined. Inside, the shelves are lined with carved wooden figures, green paint slightly uneven, each one smiling with the polite discretion of something that knows it's famous but doesn't wish to boast. A group of children presses their noses against the window, giggling. "Do you think she really looks like that?" one asks. "No," says another solemnly. "She's bigger. And she can probably sing outside." The loch glitters in the afternoon light, perfectly indifferent to its new career as a muse. Folk singers begin to visit too. They sit on low stools in the inns, guitars and fiddles balanced on their knees. Their songs are gentle things, half lullaby, half rumour, about a creature who dreams beneath the water while people above learn how to hope again. One popular tune recorded in 1949 begins softly. "In the loch so deep and still lives a heart that never will frighten men or break their rest. She keeps our secrets as a guest." The record never reached the city charts, but it stayed on jukeboxes from Inverness to Fort William, a quiet anthem for those who preferred stories with no ending. Soon, small businesses find creative ways to honor their elusive neighbor. There's a Nessie cafe serving monster scones the size of a child's hand. A tailor advertises raincoats, guaranteed waterproof, even for sightings. A nearby distillery bottles a whiskey labelled depth unknown and swears a single drop of water from the loch is added to every cask. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. The customers smile just the same. Through all of this, the creature herself, if she exists at all, remains perfectly silent. No dramatic appearances, no grand gestures. The newspapers send photographers each summer, and each summer they go home with pictures of mist, ducks, and slightly disappointed expressions. Nessie, it seems, values her privacy. There's a certain dignity in that. Not every legend needs to perform. Some are content to be the pause between two breaths, the story that gives you an excuse to stare at water until your worries dissolve. Imagine an evening in the early 1950s. The war is over, ration books have been tucked away, and the inn is full again. Lamps glow softly, their light reflected in the glasses behind the bar. The radio hums with dance music, cheerful but never hurried. A couple visiting from Edinburgh leans close together, speaking in whispers. "Do you think we'll see her?" the woman asks. The man smiles. Maybe she's already seen us. Outside, rain begins to fall. So fine it's more suggestion than weather. The loch's surface dimples, each droplet a note in an endless song. A mist drifts in, and the hills fade into silhouettes. For a moment, the water seems to breathe, then a breeze stirs, and everything is ordinary again. Or perhaps it never stopped being extraordinary. By the 1960s, the legend has woven itself into daily life. Schools hold Nessie days, where children draw the creature in chalk on the playground. Artists paint her as a soft green arc gliding through twilight. Writers describe her with words like patient, lonely, wise. Even the skeptics speak her name fondly. The argument about whether she's real becomes less important than the comfort she brings. Tourists keep coming. They stand by the railings, cameras ready, wind in their faces. Some see ripples and gasp. Others laugh at their own hope. But everyone leaves with the same quiet sense that they've stood near something that doesn't care to be proved. And that, oddly enough, feels reassuring. In the evenings, when the last buses have gone and the loch returns to stillness, locals stroll along the water's edge. The air smells of wet pine and smoke. Somewhere a dog barks once, then thinks better of it. The loch lies open, black and calm, its surface untroubled except for the faint reflection of the moon. Sometimes a heron lifts from the reeds, its wings slow and heavy, and for a heartbeat even the most skeptical passerby might whisper, "There she goes." Inside the houses, the legends linger. Grandparents tell the tale by firelight, their voices gentle and rhythmic, meant to lull children towards sleep rather than excite them. Maybe she's the last of her kind, one says. Maybe she's magic. And somewhere, in the middle of that word maybe, the children drift into dreams. Every summer brings a new attempt to find proof, a sonar blip, a blurred photograph. But each attempt folds neatly into the larger story. The failures don't disappoint anymore. They're part of the tradition. Like going fishing and being secretly glad the fish got away. The 1970s arrive, then the 80s. Cars grow faster, cameras smaller, hair taller. But the loch keeps its same unhurried pulse. Journalists write features with titles like "The Monster That Refuses to Retire" and "Loch Ness, the world's most peaceful mystery." Scientists still visit, but they laugh more than they measure. "We're chasing poetry," one of them admits to a local reporter. "It's the nicest assignment I've ever had." And poetry it remains. There's something soothing in a legend that asks for no believers, only listeners. The Loch Ness Monster never demands loyalty, never sends postcards or warnings. She exists exactly as much as you need her to. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, locals say the water hums, an echo caught between waves, like a low note from a cello. Scientists call it current vibration, but a few prefer to think it's Nessie humming back to the hills. Either way, the sound settles the heart. By the turn of the millennium, the souvenirs have multiplied. There are plush toys, mugs, calendars, snow globes. A museum opens, filled with sonar maps and newspaper clippings. Children press buttons that play recordings of mysterious underwater sounds, then giggle at how much they resemble someone burping through a snorkel. The legend continues, softened by time but never silenced. And still the loch keeps its patience. Each dawn the mist rolls in as though rehearsing the same quiet play it's performed for centuries. Tourists watch, whisper, wait, and eventually put their cameras away. The loch accepts their company graciously, the way an old cat tolerates visitors. I like to think the monster, if she's real, appreciates this gentle admiration. Perhaps she rises at night, long after everyone's gone, and looks around at the lights of the village. Perhaps she listens to the wind carrying songs and stories about her, and feels, in some deep, ancient way, affection. Not vanity, just contentment that her long, quiet life has made so many people dream. If you stand by the water now, you'll see how time has blurred everything together. Myth and memory, laughter and science. A ripple might be wind, or it might be hope stretching its limbs. A shadow might be a fish, or the soft outline of imagination, surfacing once more before sinking gently back into legend. The loch doesn't mind which you choose. It has room for both. And so, as the night settles again over the Highlands, we leave our monster in peace. Not gone, not found, just exactly where she belongs, in the space between knowing and wondering. Somewhere beneath the mist, she drifts, invisible and kind, humming her wordless lullaby to anyone still awake enough to listen. Tomorrow, we'll follow the legend as it travels far beyond Scotland's hills, into headlines, museums, and the digital age, where new seekers trade binoculars for satellites, and the world keeps falling gently in love with a creature that never needs to show her face. For now, rest with the water's calm. Let its rhythm match your breath, in and out. The loch is quiet, the night deep, and every mystery feels at home. Morning again, mist first, then the faint gold of sun finding a gap between the hills. It moves so slowly, you can almost hear it stretching. The loch, unruffled as always, pretends nothing ever happened. No cameras, no expeditions, no centuries of polite curiosity. It simply lies there, breathing. By now, our story has wandered into the present day. The world beyond these hills hums with signals and screens. Satellites blink overhead, each one capable of photographing a pebble on the shore. And yet, even in this age of proof and pixels, no one has quite managed to photograph certainty. The Loch Ness Monster remains gracefully absent from the selfie generation. Every so often, a new image appears online. A dark shape, a reflection, a ripple that forgot to behave. Headlines bloom briefly, full of words like possible, could, and perhaps. The rhythm never changes. A spark of excitement, a flurry of conversation, then the slow return to quiet. The loch has perfected the art of waiting us out. I came here one autumn not long ago, hoping to understand that quiet. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp leaves. A heron stood motionless by the reeds, the very picture of patience. Down the road, a group of students were launching a small drone. Its buzzing rose and fell, searching for mystery in pixels per second. After 20 minutes, the battery gave up. They laughed, packed it away, and went to buy chips. Even technology, it seems, needs tea breaks in Scotland. The locals, meanwhile, treat the legend the way one treats an old family story, with affection, amusement, and an unwillingness to edit. At the post office, you can still buy postcards that say, "Wish you were here," but Nessie was out. At the cafe, a small chalkboard reads, "Soup of the day, mysterious depths of tomato." It's humor as hospitality, a wink that invites you to slow down and enjoy the absurdity of being alive on a planet that still makes room for myths. And there's something healing about that, isn't there? To stand before this long, dark ribbon of water and realize how small the need for answers can become. For nearly 100 years, people have brought their worries here. Wars, recessions, deadlines, and the loch has swallowed them all, leaving only ripples and reflection. I sit on the same stone wall that tourists have leaned on for decades. A breeze lifts the scent of heather and peat. Somewhere behind me, a bus door hisses open, releasing another handful of curious souls with cameras dangling. They step to the railing, gasp softly, and whisper the same question everyone whispers. "Do you think she's real?" And just like that, they're part of the legend too. Because the answer doesn't matter, the asking does. Belief here isn't about proof, it's about participation. Every glance at the water keeps the story breathing. As the afternoon drifts on, clouds gather and slide apart again. The light changes by the minute, silver to slate to pearl. It's easy to see how imaginations thrive here. The scenery itself shapeshifts like something alive. I watch one patch of shadow stretch across the water and catch myself thinking, for just a heartbeat, there she is. Then a gust of wind scatters the thought, and I smile. The loch has played that trick on better minds than mine. When evening comes, the crowds thin. Engines fade into distance. The surface of the loch smooths back to its preferred texture, velvet mixed with mirror. The only sounds are wind in the pines and the faint tick of cooling metal from a parked car. It feels as though the day itself is exhaling. I walk down to the shore. Pebbles crunch softly under my boots. The water laps at my toes, cold and impossibly clean. If I lean close, I can see my reflection tremble, my face replaced by rings of light and shadow. Somewhere out in the middle, a fish jumps once, marking the surface with a small silver note, then disappears. A single splash to end the day. That's the truth of Loch Ness now. Not revelation, but rhythm. Every generation throws a new stone of curiosity into its depths, and every generation watches the ripples fade. The calm that follows is what people really come for. The feeling that somewhere in the world, mystery has been allowed to rest. Later, in the inn, the fire burns low. Someone hums the old song again, the one about secrets and still water. The tune drifts out through the open door, over the dark fields, down to the loch's edge. Perhaps it reaches the creature herself, wherever she may be. Perhaps she hums back, or perhaps it's only the wind making music with the reeds. Either way, it's beautiful. Outside, stars appear, small, patient lights mirrored perfectly on the water below. Two skies, one above, one beneath. I think of all the eyes that have stared into this mirror, searching for proof, and realize that what they've found instead is reflection. Their own longing for wonder looking back at them. If you're still awake, let that idea settle like silt on the lake bed. You don't need to solve every mystery to rest beside it. You just need to listen to the quiet between waves. That's where peace hides. So here we are, at the end of our slow journey, from a ripple in the 1930s to a whisper in the present. The monster, the scientist, the tourist, the songs, they've all drifted together into one long, soothing breath of history. A story that promised discovery but delivered serenity instead. May you carry a little of that serenity with you now. Breathe in the cool air of the Highlands, even if only in imagination. Breathe out the day. Let the water and the mist close softly over the noise of everything else. And if, as you drift towards sleep, you dream of a shadow gliding beneath calm waves, know that you are part of the same story. A listener keeping the legend alive by believing just enough. Good night, friends. May these ripples guide you into peaceful dreams. If you drifted off somewhere along the way, let me know below. Sweet dreams until next time. This has been Boring History for Sleep. Rest well.